Well, good afternoon, everybody. There's- it's a COVID, a little bit of a COVID foul up in terms of what Steve called this presentation and what I called it, but it really comes down to the same thing. I call it riding in high water. It's recreational boating and safety and elevated water flow. And I'll get into a little bit why I even came up with this presentation. This isn't something I would normally present. I'm not a service hydrologist. Hydrology is an interest, but I've done my share of floating, especially in my younger days. I haven't done as much recently, but I used to be quite an avid floater and canoeer. Um, uh, Probably 6 to 12 times a year. I've kind of reduced that as I've gotten older a little bit, but I still like to get out there. And I'll go into a little bit why I even came up with this presentation. It's been about a year when I first developed the first version of this presentation until now. So it's been a little while. So what the basic discussion points are going to be, discussing the impacts of high stage, not necessarily flooding. In fact, in most cases, it's not true flooding that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be just talking about water that's running higher than normal with higher than normal flow rates, but not necessarily flooding. No, not necessarily any flood warnings or flood advisories out. This is going to be kind of a gray area in terms of products that the Weather Service issues. It's not something we would normally pay a lot of attention to or point out at any rate in our hazardous weather products. I will briefly discuss the dangers of what I call post-flooding incidents. Very, very often we have dangerous floating conditions that occur after larger floods where the water is still running high or running muddy, if you will. We'll discuss some basic tools that we look at here at the Weather Service, and they're available either on a smartphone or there's tons of things out there for smartphones. And certainly on the internet, talk about stage readings and soil moisture and that kind of thing. And then I really do want to have a kind of an open discussion about how the National Weather Service and you partners can try to maybe mitigate some of the injuries or fatalities from what we call high water, what I'm calling high water incidents. So when I first got this, when I first started this was back in Memorial Day 2020. I'll take you back to that time frame, and I probably first saw this in June, maybe early June, where I was looking through some news articles, probably for something unrelated, and I came across something from Joplin News First about the Elk River, and they had all these water rescues over the Memorial Day weekend. So this was Memorial Day 2020. And it's actually the story is actually kind of repeated itself again, maybe this year to some extent. You can see some of the scenes here of the water rescues on the Elk River under a bridge there, and there were numerous water rescues on the Saturday before Memorial Day. 21 river rescues reported from the Knoll, Missouri Fire Department. So down there in far southwest Missouri, you can see some of the kind of harrowing water rescues that did occur that day at that bridge. And then here's some other scenes, and you can see the water is high. And in talking to a couple of people, there was probably maybe some lowland flooding going on at this time, but by and large, it was within bank water. Now, also recall this was, again, Memorial Day 2020. This was kind of what I would call the first weekend out during the initial flush of COVID. So a lot of people were out getting outside for maybe the first time in quite a while. School had let out, so it was a very busy weekend, and unfortunately the water was running very, very fast at that time. And so again, you had all these water rescues going on, and there were a couple of fatalities. One where somebody was swept away. This was reported by the Missouri Highway Patrol, or probably the water unit, where somebody did exit the boat and was swept downstream by a swift current and then under a log jam. And then there were other water rescues that were very close to fatalities. And unfortunately, kind of looking through the news this year, and I might actually call on Greg a little bit about some of the one incident down there in the Neosho area a little bit later on. But it's not just necessarily, it's usually precipitated by high water that we see these incidents. But the water can always be dangerous, but this is unfortunately a situation where it doesn't look bad necessarily, but the water is running more swift than what people are normally used to. So this was from the Joplin News. Again, Joplin News First. They did a great job of documenting that weekend, Memorial Day of 2020, and they actually showed some of the National Weather Service hydrographs from some of the area rivers that day, and you can see kind of a common theme with all four of these, in that you see these peaks of water, or of stages and water flow with all these rivers, and they all pretty much occurred on that Saturday before Memorial Day. And you also can see that at least in 3 of the 4 cases, the river got up into what we call action stage, which is not necessarily, it's not flood stage, but it is, again, higher than normal water. And this event certainly isn't unprecedented. You can go back several years. In finally doing some research, I found that there were a high number of fatalities back in the 2014, 2015 as well. Dozens of drownings, especially on some of our more popular floating streams. And again, the one quote that kind of stuck with me was from John Poyner with the River Ranch in Knoll, excuse me. He basically said that the biggest problem floaters make is overestimating their abilities, particularly in high water. It's where you don't necessarily recognize the danger, and unfortunately sometimes until it's too late. So going back to last Memorial Day, kind of setting it up. This map wasn't the greatest in the world. I will show, see if I can get my pointer going here. So there is, oops, technology. So there's Springfield, there's Joplin, and there's Knoll. So this was 2 days. The first map on the left is 2 days before, where we had not an incredible amount of rain. You can see in the basins around Knoll, probably on average, maybe a quarter to half inch. And then the day before, a little bit more rain occurred. Some areas, maybe overall basin average was maybe around 1 inch of rain. So nothing that would be normally alarming in terms of rainfall. The Weather Service did not have any watchers or warnings in effect. There were no river gauges that the Corps of Engineers has down there that were in flood. And our hazardous weather outlook mentioned some residual flooding may occur from yesterday's heavy rainfall. So it was talking about that map on the right, the rainfall that we got the day prior. And then, but this goes back a little farther. This now looking at maybe the rainfall we had for 3 months in advance, and it was a very, very wet late winter, early spring last year, if you recall. There were, many areas that were seeing, 15, 20 plus inches, well above normal over a 3-month period. So the soil was saturated. There were elevated flows from springs, saturated soils, and when that happens, any rain that does occur mostly goes quickly to runoff rather than being absorbed by the ground and vegetation. So, relatively minor amounts of rainfall will have a disproportionate effect on area creeks, rivers, and you'll get an unexpectedly high flow from rainfall. It really doesn't seem all that notable. So, whether a creek or a body, any kind of body of water is technically at flood stage, even if it's above normal, beware. In other words, it doesn't have to be. We don't have to be up in that area, that orange of that chart where we start to see flooding. The caution actually probably needs to be before that, when you start seeing just high flow, fast current. Water can be out of its banks, but in a lot of cases, again, it wasn't. So that river, the Spring River at Carthage there for that time period, it's not technically at flood stage, but we don't have gauges everywhere. So gauges, are really a snapshot at one location. It got real close to flood stage. 10 feet is flood stage for that particular river gauge, and it got over 9 feet. So you probably have to say that at least there was probably minor flooding going on somewhere in the area. We just don't have gauges everywhere to measure that. So that's another thing to be kind of cautious of, that when these gauges get high, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not flooding. It just means it's not flooding at that particular point. And so even going back farther, we've had a number of what I'd call catastrophic flooding events over the last 5 to 10 years. If you go back, there have been numerous really, really serious floods in the Missouri Ozarks. And what that has done, some of the canoe trips I've gone on, especially here in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, to spots that I haven't been to in a while, it's amazing to see the changes in the banks, in the current, in the places that I've gone to for years just look completely different because of flooding. And so you have a lot of debris in the water. Here you have a case on the Mark Twain National Forest where there are employees removing a dangerous tree from the Current River. That's out in south central Missouri, if you don't know, on the Missouri Ozarks Scenic Riverways. And that one tree was responsible for about 20 water rescues on a Memorial Day weekend in, again, 2018, another Memorial Day weekend. Again, it was probably a higher than normal flow, a lot of damage to trees and that kind of thing from previous flooding. So you just have a lot of dangers in there. Again, there's not going to be any flood warning or river flood warning from the National Weather Service for this, but the water can still be dangerous because of previous flooding. And I won't get too much into the safety aspects of this, but in doing research for this, there's a ton of good information out there. And I'll be the first one to admit, my wife and I do canoe together quite a bit, and we get along great. But we which is probably the sign of a good marriage. But we have run into these things before. Unfortunately, we've made some mistakes where you do run into branches that are overhanging over the river, and they can become dangerous, especially if you're not a real strong swimmer, you get ejected from your canoe. You do have a lot of hazards out there, and these hazards do come from or are more common after some serious floods. You have changes in the bank, you have changes in current, but again, those objects can literally knock you out of the boat and pin you down. And we see a lot of that, especially when the water is higher. And there are other man-made objects as well. Here you have a low-head dam, which causes when water gets higher, water spills over the dam, and you get the mechanical hydraulic spinning on the lee side of the dam, and that too can be dangerous. And we've unfortunately seen a number of accidents and drownings because of these as well in the area. One such was last year, and I think this is probably one of the things that prompted me to do a little more research into this. Where I was on Bull Creek. There was a low water dam built by the landowner there, and unfortunately there were a number of incidents, including a couple of drownings at that low water. They built a low water crossing so they could cross that field. And in one case, you can see on the left side there where the river was running very high. And in fact, if you read the article from this incident, the canoers, it was a couple, probably, I think they were probably in their 60s, but they were experienced canoers, had gone and floated and canoed and kayaked this area very often, and they would actually wait until the water was high. They would, in fact, I think that if I remember correctly, they would wait until the water was about 8 feet and then go out and canoe, because it was made it maybe a little more interesting, a little more fun. And so they purposely went out during the high water, and unfortunately, they both got caught in this hydraulic, lee side of the dam, and the woman did pass away. And this got me, kind of got me thinking. And there were, of course, lawsuits, and there's probably still litigation going on from it. But I believe this low water crossing was taken down. There's a lot of things going on with the Corps of Engineers and that kind of thing, as far as whether approval and there's a lot of things going on there. But again, high water, man-made object, can produce a lot of dangers. And then there are other things. When you get serious flooding, you get a lot of debris in the water up against bridge abutments, that catch the debris, and that causes all sorts of swirling. And eventually, and the other thing is, during the cooler part of the year, early spring, you get people that just get in the water, when it's just too cold. And that can, even strong swimmers can succumb to cold water if they're in there long enough. So, these are things people should check on before they go out and go canoeing, certainly. And as far as safety and that kind of thing, one thing, maybe we should start in our messaging, and I'm going to get into messaging, weather situations, hydrology situations, is maybe start making some recommendations. Hey, let somebody know where you're at, know the area that you're floating. If you're not going to make, I'm not naive enough to believe that someone's is going to make a literal float plan, but they should probably know their area, try to know their area well. If they're in a group, know the limitations of the people that are in the group. Just kind of have safety in the back of their mind. And again, knowing where you are, knowing what the condition of the river is, evacuation routes. There's tons of apps out there. In fact, those two screenshots on the right are from a phone app that show detailed information along the river. And of course, there are other tools that are available are, from the National Weather Service. It's as simple as checking the forecast. Has it rained recently? Check the difficulty of the river. Is it cold? Is there a cold front coming down? Is the weather going to turn colder while I'm out there? Soil moisture. I want to thank, I don't know if Megan Terry's on the call. Megan Terry and Doug Kramer, gave me some good thoughts, good information, over time here while I was putting this together. Megan actually gave me a bunch of different websites for soil moisture, and I couldn't put them all in. But have we had a recent flooding? Is the soil moist? Is just a little bit of rain going to cause that stage to go up, higher than we might normally think? It's something we all probably need to keep in the back of our minds as folks that are trying to provide safety for folks, trying to keep these things in the back of our minds ourselves in terms of, hey, is this a dangerous situation coming up? Is there, even though it's only going to be an inch of rain, can we expect, much higher flow rate because the soil's been moist recently? We have to start thinking and kind of connecting all these things together. And again, we do, and many people have probably already visited our weather.gov page that shows the different stages on the computer. I will also say that there are tons of weather apps as well. And I have a couple on my own phone that show the actual river stages for the area as well. And in doing the research, I didn't know about this, but the USGS has something you can set up as far as a water alert. When you reach a certain stage or a certain flow rate, you can actually set up a real-time texting to an email that lets you know that, hey, the river has reached this stage. It's a good service. I haven't really tried it myself, but the Weather Service does have similar services available, and it's nice to see that the USGS does as well. Finally, there's a couple screenshots of this. Actually, these are from a year ago when I first started doing this, but you can see, again, tons and tons of weather apps, and then on the screen on the right is actually and I can't recall the name of it. I'll probably look it up here in a little bit. But it's a river app, and you can literally look up the stage of any river. Actually, I think this has every river in the world that has a gauge available. But this one, again, the screen I'm showing is from Missouri only. But you can look up all the gauge sites right off your phone. Of course, you do have to worry about cell coverage and that kind of thing. If someone's actually going out and out in the field, you have to worry about, is your phone rugged enough to take it? Is waterproof? Certainly not necessarily want to take my phone out on the river or without a lot of protection. And probably maybe an underutilized tool for floaters, but the MoDOT travel map shows all those low water crossings that are flooded. If you see a lot of low water crossings flooded, that's probably a good indicator that the water's high. And so that's something else that's pretty easy to check out online. Is just looking at the MoDOT travel map. If you see a lot of icons that show flooded roads, the water is certainly probably still running high. And there are a bunch of places you can check out as well. Tons of places online. In some cases, if someone's planning a float, it'd be a good message for them is to call ahead. Call the place that they might be renting their canoe from. Call the national park at the Ozark Scenic Riverways. How is the river? I'm not a great swimmer. Is this a good time for me to go get out on the river? Again, it's there are a lot of tools out there, and some of them are as simple as just making a phone call. So, how can the weather and safety community help? And this really, everything I've outlined so far is probably some stuff you've already kind of know, or at least if you don't know it, it makes sense to you, and you've probably thought about it. But now, how can the Weather Service, how can folks that perform water rescues, how can emergency management, how can we help the public? What kind of messaging can we do on social media? Can we have? Is there a one-pager available that we can display on our websites that show flood danger? I think social media is probably going to be the easiest and best way to go, especially if you can kind of see these past Memorial Day weekends that we've had the past couple of years, where the water is high. People are going to be out there on the water. The water's high, but it's still sunny. It's not raining. It's kind of all a recipe for, hey, this could be a busy weekend for the folks that are going to be performing water rescues. How do we get that information out? What kind of messaging can we do? And that's really I'll probably ask for some suggestions from you all here in a little bit about that. Here's a couple of messages that we sent out earlier this year. I really liked the one on the right there, because I think this was, let's see, the date was May 30th, so it was late in May. The rivers are running high, and this was we tweeted that we probably had a Facebook post similar to this as well, with a safety message. It's I'm not naive enough to believe that we're gonna catch the folks that aren't going to be paying attention to this. They want to go out and have a good time. They want to have fun. They're probably not going to pay a whole lot of attention to water safety. But we've got to try. I think to some extent we've got to try, and kind of hit it over and over again, like low water crossings. I know we still have a lot of low water crossing issues as well, but I think over the years, if you keep hitting these issues over and over again, hopefully you're at least reaching some folks. And then when we have lingering flooding, when we have low water crossings that are still flooded, we can maybe mention that hey, yeah, canoeing might be a little more dangerous than it normally is because of the high water flow. And so I think this might be my last slide. And I just put this in here just recently. It was funny when I came up for the title for this presentation. I called it Riding in High Water. You really only have to change two words, and it's a completely different meaning. And unfortunately, this is what you're going to see out in a lot of Missouri float streams and creeks. You're going to see people that are probably not going to be too caring about safety. Their number one priority is going to be out there having a good time. And I'm not naive to believe that we're going to be able to make everybody do the right thing. But this is, and I know this is what the folks, Water Patrol, the folks that are performing water rescues, swiftwater rescue teams, are probably dealing with, on every year, several times every year. People that don't have a lot of self-awareness. Again, let's talk maybe some strategies. What works, what doesn't. I will say from my experience, safety information that comes out from the local folks, whether it be fire departments, state agencies like the Missouri Highway Patrol, have a lot more impact than maybe the National Weather Service as far as safety, because it's coming from somebody local, especially on a local level, fire departments, county emergency management agencies, because you guys know those folks better than we do. You know the folks that are out there. So I mean, getting a good message. I'll retweet anything that I see on my shift that I see as a great message. And I've actually seen some really good stuff from some news agencies and some fire departments out there that I've retweeted because the safety information is so good. And again, it's coming from the local folks. So I'm going to open it up to everybody now for questions, comments, concerns, ideas, anything that you guys really want to talk about in terms of water safety. I'd be real happy to hear it.